Thank you so much for joining me. This is Michele Heyward. This is another episode of Built by Women, where we're focusing on Black, Latina, and Indigenous women, Native women who are building the United States infrastructure. They're designing it, they're studying it, they're building it. So that is why it's called Built X Women X Y chromosome. Or XX rather. So we are today are talking about 5 ways to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in your engineering construction or AEC company. And I'm going to do things in a particular order because to me, it does matter in order for organizations to be able to really grow um, and provide an equitable workplace specifically. And what does that look like? So I'm not going to take up too much time, but I do want to iterate a few points so that each of you have things to really think about, ways that your organization and individuals can move forward. The reason to promote diversity and inclusion in AEC is several reasons. Right now, the industry is short not only skilled labor, but also technical talent, so engineers, in order to design and build, maintain our infrastructure. As we head further and further into global warming, the ability to have enough talent to be able to do this work is going to be critical for all Americans, as well as other non-Americans, immigrants, undocumented people who live in this country, who support our economy. And so it's really important to understand why we have to promote it in this industry, DEI in this industry, because it literally impacts us all at every economic level. Of course, the poorer you are, the more you will feel the impacts of global warming and our failing infrastructure systems sooner. So the first area I want to focus on is establishing a foundation of inclusivity. And when I say a foundation, it literally talks about, and we've been going through this since the murder of George Floyd, where people have been hyper focused on educating themselves. What is racism? What are barriers that Black people encounter? But as you're embracing and creating company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion, you should also be promoting it, especially from your leadership at all levels, especially middle management. Middle management oftentimes becomes a hot point for building equitable workplaces and places of inclusion, as well as safe spaces and organizations. When we look at establishing this foundation of inclusivity, it's important that organizations are creating a diverse and inclusive leadership team. In order to do that, you're moving Black and Brown employees up through the ranks. And oftentimes they are siloed, people aren't mentioning their names, they have no sponsorship, or they're being pushed out on performance improvement plans. So leaders need to not only educate themselves about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but it also need to understand what is going on in their organization as far as policies, practices, and procedures which are not inclusive to this organization. And so when we talk about the foundation of inclusivity, it is the foundation of your organization that you really need to study and understand, and how it negatively impacts the development and growth of diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as belonging in your organization. So you may be implementing clear DEI policies and guidelines, and you may have well-defined DEI policies that help guide employees and understand what is to be expected of them, that set standards for an inclusive culture within your organization. But if you don't first understand and study what is already in place, you will miss this opportunity to really have it grow and expand throughout your organization. Oftentimes what we've seen as far as success within an organization when it comes to DEI taking hold is we're having older white men who are at the end of their careers willing to do this work for 3 to 5 years. But when they leave this organization, that work unravels. So it can't just be one older white man who's at the end of his career doing this work that is bought into the work to keep this alive and growing and diving really into the roots of an organization. You have to have other at the top in leadership that are really doing this work. So establishing that foundation is not just one person at executive level. It's not just one board member. You have to have a consensus of group within the entire organization. They have to be educated. They have to be actionable in DEI, not only on an organizational level, but also on an individual level. And then they need to understand, study and understand, assess your current practices, policies, and procedures that are counter to your diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and then start making changes and implementing clear DEI policies and guidelines, but also changes to other practices, policies, and procedures. One of the better frameworks that I've seen around diversity and inclusion has come from ISO. So it's ISO 30415. ISO doesn't look at D&I, it calls itself diversity and inclusion. So D&I just in the realm of HR or HR and supplier diversity. It looks at it through the supply chain and product and process. It goes throughout every avenue of an organization. That is what needs to be done when you're talking about the foundation of inclusivity in your organization. Okay, so if you have questions, please let me know. I know I kind of jumped in today, but also let me know where you're tuning in from. I would love to know who's joining me and where you're joining me from. The next part I want to focus on is around becoming culturally competent. What we're seeing is organizations focus on diversity recruitment, but they haven't become culturally competent. And so you really have to go in and embrace, have again, a company-wide commitment to being culturally competent, but you have to acknowledge and respect the diverse backgrounds and experience of employees. This takes, I know, time, but I think it also will take shifts in your employee base, meaning this won't happen until certain employees leave, whether they quit, retire, or are terminated from the organization. Oftentimes, organizations, too often, I should say, organizations will hold on to toxic employees because they're high performing. Those same toxic employees are turning over talent that you may not realize are really the talent that's driving the results that you're seeing from this high performing manager. But you don't know this because of your current practice, policies, and procedures, and truly in order to identify some of your best talent organizations. So I challenge you to really focus on who needs to be removed in the organization in order for you to have a culturally competent organization. Nobody wants to talk about how they have to get people out of the way and out of the organization to make this happen. Usually the people that are driving for culturally competent are run away because we never really talk about the people that are driving out the work, that are pushing back, that are retained in the organization because they have relationships, because they produce so much and generate revenue for organization. And really, racism and sexism costs way more billions of dollars, $600 billion in the US, but organizations are okay losing $6 billion, but they're not okay when it comes to calling out and reporting and really removing the people that are stopping DEI work from taking hold in that organization and it truly being culturally competent. So this would lead you creating a diverse and inclusive leadership team. Culturally diverse leadership teams bring unique perspectives, right? They have different insights. And this is truly important in our industry when we're talking about infrastructure. People often say, hey, well, we put a notice in the paper to come out to this event to talk about the new highway that is going to go into this community, and 6 people showed up. So the community doesn't care. No, the community could care. It could have been the bus route that people are taking that takes them longer. They didn't get home until after the meeting was over. It could be the fact that they work 1.5 to 2 jobs, so they don't have enough energy or time to come to a public meeting. It is important that we understand when we talk about communities, different communities have different work hours, they have different modes of transportation, communication, and that needs to be considered in a much broader sense. We may need to have things in multiple languages as well. And so when we are developing and creating diverse and inclusive leadership teams, they can bring out, and hopefully are bringing out, how do we communicate with communities to let them know what's going on with all of the rain, why we're replacing a bridge, or why they can't go this certain route, especially when we have a lot of rain or we're having exceptionally a lot of rain, right? And so how do we communicate that it is okay to drink the water? It's not an issue for you to drink the public water system as opposed to going buying bottled water, especially when it is not financially feasible for people. So just keep that in mind as well. Being culturally competent also means implementing clear, culturally competent DEI policies and guidelines. And I know that's kind of like what you're using the phrase from the term. Okay, so policies that are culturally competent are crafted with consideration for the diverse workforce, addressing specific needs and challenges faced by the employees. One of the things that I found that a lot of people don't necessarily understand is thinking even outside of the religious base of Christianity. And what are the needs and the holidays that non-Christians, people that have different faiths or they don't practice a faith, what are their needs when it comes to time off to celebrate? What are the needs of women or trans people in their organization? And they're not taking into account any of these backgrounds. It is very, very centered around white men. And so you have to taking a culturally competent approach is really truly understanding your employees, what they may have disclosed to the organization found around gender, race, family structure, family and needs, physical needs, access to handicap equipment, certain workstations, like what are their needs, and really creating policies around those. Oftentimes we're pulling templates from places that really don't speak necessarily to the employees we have currently in each and every one of our locations if you have multiple ones. If you have one, sometimes it's better. It's a little bit easier. But then again, as you have aging employees, you may find those policies now add on and grow, or you have employees that are pregnant, and so they have to have different needs for a certain time period when they're pregnant. So think about how culturally competence shows up. And so you're implementing these through policies and practice changes in your organization. So you have to really address specific needs sometimes, and sometimes this just goes straight through HR. But some of those policies need to be broader and should be shared and seen if there are other people in the organization that need access to those policies as well. All right. Next, I want to focus on really retention, because your leaders, organizational leaders, buying in and understanding diversity and inclusion leads to belonging. Becoming culturally competent, which helps retain talent, diverse talent, but also having to let go talent that is not buying in, does not believe in diversity and inclusion, may see it as a threat to their ability to be promoted in an organization, may see it as being unfair and equitable, can cause a pushback from your ability to really create diversity, equity, inclusion in organization. But really getting to retaining the Black, Latino, Hispanic, Indigenous, Native, women, LGBTQAI, and so many different other marginalized groups in the organization, how do you retain that talent? And we have, in the last few years, really focused on training, offering training, not forcing training on our employees and our teams. We focus on establishing employee resource groups. Some organizations have rolled them back because people have said, oh, well, they are social groups, and they are not social. Just because you have a Black ERG and a women's ERG, what is social about those? Right? And so it's really those ERGs really are providing a support system that contributes to a higher job satisfaction and retention among your underrepresented employees. And the underrepresented employees in each organization, and sometimes your location will vary. When you're looking at retaining your talent, it's going to be important that you're encouraged open dialogue and feedback, but you also have to provide a safe space for this to be done. And so you're regularly seeking out input from employees and addressing their concerns so that you're demonstrating that not only you hear them, but you're going to push for change. What I found is organizations scale out what change they can make the quickest, what has the dollar amount impact, and so forth. And that's fine to do it that way. But what they don't do or share are the things that are going to be longer term, that takes more work, more resources, and they never share that within their organization. So I encourage you to share a timeline of the things that you're going to do and say, hey, this will get updated once a quarter or twice a year. Just look for updates. We'll send out notifications, but make it at least available on the internet within the organization. People are like, oh, we don't want to be tied to this. Your employees want you tied to because you said you were committed to this change. And hiding behind I don't want to be tied to it indicates directly that you are not committed to this change. You are not committed to DEI work. And so your retention at this point of your underrepresented or marginalized employees is going to go down because they see they see what you're doing or not doing, and they don't believe that you're truly about change in the organization. And then lastly, I want to say, when it comes to talent retention, is also look at your practices, policies, and procedures. Earlier, I'd mentioned PIP, or performance improvement plan, and truly taking a look at the data in your organization as it pertains to PIPs and other practices, looking at talent that's being retained, talent that is leaving the organization. So you better understand who's coming in, what's their tenure with the organization, and who's leaving, right? And that is going to be critical in order to do this work. And I'm talking about 5 reasons today, 5 ways rather to promote diversity, equity, inclusion in your AEC or engineering construction company. I want to move on to a very critical part that I often find organizations can't understand, is that looking at developing your talent internally, career development and advancement, and how people are identified as high potential and high performing. And so not everybody is trained as they needed to necessarily perform at a higher level, or training is only done in 1 or 2 ways, wherein people have different learning styles as well. So the 4th way to really promote DEI in your organization is empowering career development and advancement. So one way is offering mentorship within your organization. I just did a post on LinkedIn about mentorship, and 20 plus years ago, when I was finishing undergrad and I was interviewing for jobs, one of the questions I asked was if the company offered mentorship program for their recent college graduates and or new hires. Most of the responses were, oh, that's a really great idea. We should do something like that. Still to this day, 20 plus years later, many organizations are still now offering mentorship. So that is one way to really help guide people within the organization along a career path and showing that you value their employment with your organization. The next one has a larger gap, especially for Black employees, which is sponsorship. Being able to have a sponsor within an organization drastically changes the career trajectory for employees. They have somebody that is advocating for them behind the doors for projects, for assignments, for promotions, for raises, for training. And so having even a formalized sponsorship program will also help with not only retaining the talent, but also career development and advancement. And then lastly, we're looking at providing access to training and development opportunities. I know I started with that description and you probably thought I was going to go that way. When we, again, don't have provide equal access to our employees for training and skill development, it prevents them from really growing and advancing in our organization. And when they're seeing people around them being trained, being mentored, being sponsored, it again tells them this is not the company, the organization that they want to be with. And so it impacts your retention. And then lastly, this ties back to another LinkedIn post I did, implementing performance evaluations that consider the contributions beyond traditional metrics. Actually, this goes back to really understanding how are your performance evaluations set up? What are the biases that come into play when managers and others provide their feedback in those performance evaluations? And then how do you remove as much bias as possible in that process? So it's really important that you consider and reconsider how your performance evaluations work. Are you focused more on collaboration, teamwork, and contributions, or is it purely on outcome and revenue-driven type activities? And also, how are managers trained on providing feedback on performance reviews and evaluations? So again, it's still more training, and it's analysis of what employers and managers are saying on those performance evaluations as well. And then the last part of this that I want to talk about really go to promoting inclusive leadership and decision making. When we look at what is going on in the workplace, we have to take into account leadership and their decision making style. And that is looking at and ensuring diverse representation in decision making process and leadership within your leadership roles. So again, diverse perspectives at all levels of decision making can lead to a more innovative and well-rounded solution. And what that means is the poor and the underrepresented and the marginalized are not left and last in these conversations and discussions, but more so, how do we help them the most because they have the least amount of resources? And what does that look like when we have these conversations, especially around our infrastructure? We're also promoting allyship and advocacy within the organization. So you maybe want to have some type of advocacy role and team. And some of you are maybe doing this through ESG or corporate social responsibility. But it's really important to encourage employees to be allies for one another, but in our space to be allies and abolitionists for the public, especially those whose voices are often unheard or muted because they are not valued often by society. And the last thing I want to add in around promoting inclusive leadership and decision making is encouraging the collaboration and of diverse perspectives. And this is really a different ways you can go about it. It can be subcommittees, committees, it can be developing teams overall from concept to actual build out of different parts of infrastructure. But they're actively seeking input from diverse team members. They can be employees, it can be also the community that are helping them solve the problem that they have at hand. So it's not just one viewpoint of life that is being used to help develop and design as well as construct different parts of infrastructure projects. So it's truly, truly important that we include so many voices in the entire process. And we have a comment about sponsors that I want to read here. Sponsors would be great as having advocacy matters. Mentors are essential as well. Inherent bias may be hard to overcome. I agree. Inherent biases, even things that other people may have said about an employee inside an organization, especially if this particular manager trusts what other people say, other managers and leaders say in an organization. And when you show up and you exhibit none of the signs that have been told to them, they're confused. They're like, so was the other person lying or did you change your behavior? And oftentimes it doesn't go in favor of the marginalized and or underrepresented employee. And so it's really important to have sponsorship brings in advocacy, and that does absolutely matter so much when it comes to biases in the workplace. I completely agree. So I want to do a quick recap when we're talking about 5 ways to promote diversity, equity, inclusion in your AEC or engineering construction company. And I think I got them in order. I'm looking at my notes because yes, I got to have notes. So establishing a foundation of inclusivity. You also want to be culturally competent. Retention practices, retention does matter. You also want to promote inclusive leadership and decision making. And then but that's 5, but 4 was career development and advancement are also keys to having the talent we need to design, build our U.S. infrastructure and maintain it as well. And right now we have so many gaps, so many employees that are retiring in so many roles. Now is not the time to fade away from diversity, equity, inclusion practices within your organization. We're short too many talented people, and it's going to impact everybody. And so it is important that we promote DEI even more in this industry than we have before. So everybody, that is what I have this week for Built by Women. We will be back next week with a civil engineer in New York City. We're in New York City, talking about her journey into engineering. She didn't know what it was. So it's going to be a really fun story about how community, how peer pressure, and maybe it's not peer influence, rather, got her into engineering. So come meet Jade. Will be with us next week, civil engineer, and I would love for y'all to have come join me to welcome her again Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join me on LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as YouTube. All right, everybody, have a great week, and I will talk to you later. Bye.